Well, hello, I'm Debbie Kitterman, and welcome to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we equip you and challenge you to dare to hear the voice of God. Well, I am excited to introduce to you my next guest. Diane Arnold just wrote this book, 12 Habits for a Sound Mind and a Joyful Life. And it actually dovetails right in with the series that I just finished with Amy Rogers called Becoming the Bride. This is going to be a powerful episode, but if you don't know who she is, let me tell you a little bit about her. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about her new book that just came out. So Diane Arnold is a licensed professional counselor, certified EFT and EMDR therapist, and one of the founders of the Grace Center, an international emotional healing center. We'll let you know how you can connect with her at the end of the podcast episode. But Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I've been really looking forward to this.
Well, I've been looking forward to it too, because when I found out about this book and they were like, "Hey, do you want to interview her?" and I was like reading about it, I was like, yes, this will tie in really well with what we've been talking about, because we've been talking about bridal identity and how the church needs to be ready. And, my own personal word from the Lord is really talking about, the emotional and physical healing that we need to step into becoming the bride. And so you're a licensed counselor.
Yes.
And you've encountered, I'm sure, a number of people that have been struggling with their identity and mental health issues, because I think that's prevalent today. Can you share kind of what you noticed, what really caused you to write this book at this time in this season?
I think one of the biggest things, and thank you for asking that, is, in mental health, we often are seeing clients for self-esteem issues, right? Right.
Yeah.
And the reality is that parallels with not knowing who I am, not knowing my value, not knowing my worth. And, I was sitting in my office one day and I went, okay, they don't have their identity. They don't know who they are, Lord. They don't know what they're carrying. And I was always using that with my clients. And I thought, okay, these things, for whatever reason, people get stuck, in these categories. So as I worked with clients, I just started kind of putting into piles, these are the things that I think get in the way of knowing that. These are some of the things. Oh my gosh, you could go, on for a long time, but these are more of the common things that I would run into.
How did you narrow it down to two?
I know, right? Well, like I said, these were the things that I felt like I was dealing with people on, especially young adults, dealing with people on where, that felt like they were wandering, that there were too many voices. And when we deal with that age group, if you don't mind that I say this, they're constantly struggling with who to listen to because of this. We've got, they've got so many voices coming at them and ideas and options. Coming out. We all do, not just young adults. I shouldn't just pick on them, because millennials are my favorite people, but it's that constant barrage, of being able to quiet that and say, okay, what is it I exactly need to heal, grow in, restore in this next season?
Yeah. Well, and you started out really in the introduction. If you don't mind, I'm going to quote you. You said, our ability to walk in strong mental health and true joy requires that we first have an understanding of who we really are, which is really the foundation for what we do and what God has called us to do. And I think it's so true that identity piece, like we've heard the phrase, you know who you are and whose you are.
Right. That's good. Yeah.
Say it, but I think we don't actually know what that means and how to put it into practice. And I thought that you did really well with laying things out for people. So I think we see that there's this rise of mental health challenges, right? That we're experiencing and stuff. And so with the rise of the mental health challenges today, what are some key factors that you believe are contributing to this trend, and how does your book address that?
So we're at like over 70% for the Gen Z millennial group, which is crazy. And I think that was one of the other reasons. I'm watching all these people come in, to the office with these areas where, again, it feels like they're wandering, that there's no deep anchor in them, that there's nothing saying, here's my self-worth and my purpose, and if you are listening to this and you have found that, isn't it wonderful? I used to use my husband from a million years ago. Well, we're not a million years old, but sometimes it feels like it, but early on, he knew that he wanted to be in finance. And he used to jump out of bed. He used to know that's what he was called to do, was to work with numbers. And the people in his sphere became his little kingdom per se. He was constantly, and is to this day, constantly reaching them, helping them, with their problems, with, helping them start studies. I mean, right now, the bank that he works at is literally known as a place to go if you're a believer. Like, it's become to culture, a place to zone in on, because he carries it. Because God asked him to carry it, right? And every one of us, when we know that purpose, what God sent us to earth to do, we are so much more satisfied with who we are and why we're here. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things, in answer to your question, is, and as we talk, we're on social media, is the barrage of social media. We all know in our minds that people are not displaying the normal life. They're displaying when they're happy and they're smiling and things are going well, right? And then we get on there and we compare my child and my grandchild or my spouse that isn't all those things, that leaves all their junk everywhere and, is depressed or dissatisfied or whatever it is, and that's my real reality, and I feel like it's just, I don't know, it's just a dark hole for every one of us because we all want to check in on it. But we forget to remind ourselves that it can cause us real shame and rejection. It can really hit to who we are.
Yeah. Okay.
That's one.
Yeah. That I want to, since you brought up shame and rejection, you talked a lot about that. And this quote by you, it really stopped. And I want you to kind of unpack this a little bit, because I think people deal with shame and rejection, but they don't really fully understand how much it attacks our identity. So you said, when we try to hide who we are or our identity, it can be because we are struggling with shame. And it made me stop and go, the rejection piece I had put in there, some of the other things I had put in there, but I was like, Debbie, why have you not tied that to shame in some people's lives? And I think that is so important for people to understand, is because we have these other things like the rejection and the shame that are attached to it. And you said this too earlier on. You said, we are designed to be God's bride. Knowing how God feels about us becomes very powerful once we learn to accept it. So talk to me a little bit about that, because shame and rejection get in the way of us accepting what we read in the Bible or what we know is supposed to be true, but and so how does one come to accept it so that we can walk in the true design that God has for us?
Yeah. And you nailed it by reading it, short, easy answer. Yeah. We have to heal some of those things in our life. I mean, that is why the book, that is why it is, what we do in therapy. When I say short, easy, it's not, of course, we have to realize the things that have brought us that in our life and process them, whether it be with, the thought patterns or the emotions that are, keeping us held up. And when you talk about shame, one of the things, well, two things I want to say. One, I experienced it greatly in my life because I had a great big betrayal with my spouse, the spouse that I just talked about. We are still married. He had an affair, a very public affair, Wall Street Journal front page. Public affair. And I laugh now, people, please, I understand if you're going through that right now, it's hurtful. It's hurtful, but I'm 20 some years out of that, and the Lord has helped me heal. But all the things that we're talking about, I had to walk out.
Yeah.
And I thought, yes, I'm healing from betrayal and I'm healing from rejection. And one of the weird things that I would do is go sit in a closet because I had young kids and I wanted to, I knew enough to be healthy to express my grief, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that I literally was hiding. And I was hiding from other people's expectations. That I was afraid, well, what would they think of me? How are they processing me? And the Lord basically said to me, it is exactly what Adam and Eve did. They made those skins and they hid who they were rather than deal with what they did. They messed up, they sinned, we all do, right?
Yeah.
But instead they hid from God. And it was a very big thing in my life. I was like, wow, and I realized processing it that I had dealt with shame since a kid of never adding up or never, being able to, be what other people and or my family, wanted me to be. The expectations weren't enough, but I would have never put that word on it. Right? I just would have never put that word on it. And it wasn't until I was sitting in that closet crying that God said, when you're hiding, then we're probably dealing with shame. And, if this were not something that you thought was you or your problem, you'd be talking with a friend. But you're sitting in isolation, hiding. And I'm like, sometimes God, you and I tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of another quote that you said in the book. And I was like, this is so true. Because you said it's going to take some risk to overcome the shame, which requires you from coming out of that hiding and trusting God or a therapist or a friend to walk through the process with you. So that's really powerful.
It's really powerful. But the biggest risk, and I talk about this, there's a therapist out there by the name of Brene Brown. Have you heard of her?
I have.
Brene Brown. And one of the things one of the biggest things that really helped me with a lot of my clients is she said that if you could see shame, like if it were an entity, and you could stick it in a petri dish, okay? And you could stick unconditional love, like the unconditional love of a friend, like you said, I don't know if a therapist unconditionally loves, but they certainly are, they're unconditional. The unconditional love of the Father, if you could stick those in a petri dish together, the shame would not survive the unconditional love.
Yeah.
It literally, right? But getting that shame into that petri dish is going to take risk on your part, exposing yourself to people that should have or should unconditionally love you, including the Father God, is going to take some risk on your part. It's walking toward it. I didn't put this in the book, but it does remind me of the woman with the issue of blood.
Yeah.
It's like going to take a risk on my part is exactly what she was doing was, I've got all this shame in my life, but I'm going to walk toward this anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And at times the bride did in Song of Solomon. At times she would hide from it, and at times she would walk toward that love that he kept trying to give her, even though she thought she was dark and unlovely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Because there was you said it's one thing to be in awe of God, but quite another to be in relationship and intimate with Him, and and you talked about the Shulamite woman in the Song of Songs throughout this and how you tied it to that. And I thought that's so good because we can be in awe of who God is, but it does take real courage and bravery to actually have relationship with Him and to be intimate with Him at a level that we feel exposed or vulnerable. And but that's part of that process, I think, of having a sound mind and a joyful life. And you kind of talk about that throughout. I want to talk about rejection and the story that you told, because I think a lot of people deal with rejection. I know that when I'm walking people through and ministering to them and walking through some stuff, rejection comes up a lot. And so you said in the book, you're telling a story about your friend, and she said, I see rejection as a gift. And that stopped me. I was like, huh? Did I read that right?
Me too. What did she say? Yeah. I was like, what?
Yeah. So talk about that because I was like, I had to go back. I'm like, did I really read that, or did my like brain fill that in somehow? And then, but it's such a powerful story, and I think it's a different way. I mean, I say to people, remember, it's God's protection. It's not rejection. I say that a lot. Like, my mom's, we lost my dad 5 years ago. She's like, she's lonely. So she's trying to meet somebody. She's not sure she wants to marry somebody, but
Right.
when it doesn't work out, I'm like, God's protection, mom, not rejection. But how we immediately go there. And then I'm reading this and I was like, I'm going to tell her that rejection's a gift, but unpack that, Diane. Talk a little bit about that for us, will you?
Yeah, I think that the big concept came from you. I was working with a high school student at one point, and the same thing, like you just said, with your friend, they constantly, couldn't get it together in the lunchroom, and was eating in the library by themselves, and at her after school communities, the group wasn't joining her, and this was an amazing young girl that I think ended up going to some Ivy League college. And the reality is the people that she kept trying to be in relationship with would have been just horrible for her. As an adult, I kept thinking, I know you're being protected, but it probably feels so lonely, for you, because I could see her throwing herself at boys, which I think she would have been willing to do anything,
Yeah.
to get the attention. And I thought, well, I'm kind of glad that they're leaving you alone, and she completely thrived in college. It was amazing, and for her, it was a gift.
Yeah.
And it probably sure didn't feel like it, at the time. And I know as believers, as people, we're all kind of like, can you instantly fix this? Can you make this pain go away? And it felt like I walked with her, the example in the book. It's like I walked with them through the pain, trying to help them understand it,
Yeah.
rather than, and to walk through it rather than to avoid it and go for the easiest fix.
Yeah. That's good. Because sometimes we think that the easier fix is going to be the better fix. And in reality, sometimes you have to walk through it to really heal from it, to be whole. I've learned that. I've tried to stuff way too many things in closets thinking it was going to be a long-term solution, and it never is. So I always tell people, no, it's better if we just go ahead and let God shine some light on that so that we can move forward. I really,
Tell me what you liked about that story in the book.
I love that about the story in the book was because I had never thought of it as like a gift. I mean, I quoted, it's God's protection, not rejection, but that well, you were talking about flipping the narrative like right after that. And I was like, that's so good. Cause I talk about flipping the script a lot. Like, okay,
Yeah.
no, this is the way we see it, but let's bring God's truth into it and let's flip the script and begin to speak that. So I was going to ask you to talk about, how do we change the narrative? And because you say we have to practice being purposeful about our narratives, which I think is really good for people. And that this is kind of a piece that's kind of missing, I think. In a lot of people's lives, because a lot of people don't go to therapy, and this is like 12-step therapy right here.
It is definitely therapy. For those of you that are listening, definitely it's not your, just journal it and I don't mean to say this like but read, just read your Bible verses and journal. It's not. I'm actually walking you through some very I would call them effective therapy models.
Yeah.
If you can, in a group situation where you're trying to help yourself, I would always say, because it is that if you were ever stuck, if you ever have questions, please, get a hold of a counselor and see, what's going on, because that's a good thing. You've hit something in you that probably needs some help. So rewriting the script, I always want to talk about, and if you're a neurologist out there, please don't shoot me because I'm going to really dumb down all your research, but there's like neurological pathways in our brain that something triggers it and it goes to, this is how I'm going to think about that, or this is what maybe I'm going to do. Trigger, boom, right? And that's a habit. Somebody gives me a dirty look or doesn't smile at me when I smile at them, boom, I feel rejected. What do? I go to the lunchroom or I leave the room or, I defend myself, whatever your normal response is, and unfortunately for us, I think this is why the Bible is so clear that we need to be careful what we think, be careful what we say. Unfortunately, those pathways don't go away. We have to add a pathway. Okay? We have to add a new one. So I have this trigger, someone gives me that look, and now I've got to hang a left or I hang a right. Right? If you think of it like a road, normally I'll go down this road and I do this thing. Now I've got to hang a left and hang a right. And more importantly, it has to be deeper than that first pathway in order for that to become the automatic way to go.
Okay.
So I got to really practice that. I got to really say, I'm going to choose to go with this thought. I'm going to choose to think, okay, they're having a busy day. I'll get back with them later. I'm going to choose to say, everybody has crabby moments, and I'm not going to think of it that way. Whatever it is, but I'm going to choose that and I'm going to hang a left, hang a left, hang a left. Now that will be the automatic way my brain goes. However, that first one is always going to be an option for me. It's unfortunately, it's always going to be, I can't erase that. So, I'm going to literally have to choose, should I go back down here and feel rejected, or am I going to take this one?
That's really good. That's really good. Because we don't want to keep going. Yeah, it is hard, especially since they're there and we can't like write over them, but we can have tools to work around them. And that's really good. I want you to talk about the plant study. This was really intriguing to me. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I mean, I had a lot of highlights in this section.
I know you intimidated me with all your
I know.
Stickers. I was like, for those of you who listen, I told Debbie we were on TBN last week, and Matthew Crouch had his book.
He
had everything dog-eared, and I was like, oh my gosh.
I used to dog ear, and then it's just easier with the post-it notes. I should actually take like stock out and post it because I use so many of them. But I
That's
find it's
amazing.
easier. I find it's easier. So you talk about this plant study from 2021 that shows positive communication can affect all living things, and I want you to talk about this because I think we can relate this to this purposeful narrative, how we help to rewrite some of those things. But then you also tied it to the Shulamite bride and how she's learning not only her identity in the process in the Song of Songs, but that is realizing that she was designed as the bride to walk in relationship with someone who is safe and has greater things in store for her. And I thought, this is what the church so needs to hear today. So I'm just going to let you talk about this.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. And actually, when you said it, I thought of another thing. So
Okay.
if I were writing this book over, I'd add this. But when we were actually in Israel, and I've only been there once, so when we were in Israel, we got to one side of the temple. And they're digging, at least then, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, they were digging under, under the temple. And if you've been to Israel, it's a lot of rocks and dirt, right? It just looks like a lot of rocks and dirt everywhere. And I could feel it. Your spirit could feel it, And I finally grabbed the guide and I said, what in the world, what went on here? Because I expected that Wailing Wall to have this great big experience. But in reality, that would have been where they had the furniture that related to the Holy Spirit. And that's where we were standing. And I was like, the rocks will cry out. Literally, the rocks will cry out, because there is nothing but dirt there, right? And that very same thing happens when you're speaking life or not speaking life into your situations, into your relationships, into even you've heard people talk about this with their health, and speaking into their health in a positive way of not claiming a sickness. And I'm very sensitive to that when people say, well, I have cancer. I'm like, okay, you have symptoms of cancer, and doctors have called it that name, but what do you want to call it? Right?
Yeah.
What do you want to speak over yourself? So in this study, it was basically, they were speaking over plants, over their household plants. And one of them was getting ugly rock music. I shouldn't say rock music's ugly, but they were just blaring music at it and speaking harsh words, telling it the branches weren't pretty and, that it was an ugly plant and it was dying. And the other one, they were speaking life. Almost like you do over your cat or your dog. You're such a good plant. You're such a,
Yeah.
I can't wait till you bear fruit. I can't wait to see it. And that in the study, there was very obvious differences in how those words were reflected in that plant life. And one of them died. And the other one became, flourishing plants. And I thought of so many things when I was writing that, because how many of us speak negatively over ourselves, whether you are saying it out loud or not, right? Or speak negatively over your spouse or your children or whatever it is. The other thing that came to my mind when I was writing that was, with Jewish children, they're blessed by their family and their father in the morning when they get up and in the evening. before they go to bed. Literally, they bless their kids routinely twice a day. I don't know how many other times, it's a Jewish tradition to do that, but routinely twice a day. And when I think of Jewish children, they're they know they're a good deal. I mean,
They do.
literally overall, they are confident people, and they end up, if most of the Jewish people are very successful, right?
Absolutely.
And I've thought, okay, you are constantly speaking life, over those children. So when I was writing that part, I was like, what are you saying to yourself,
Yeah.
to others, to be very conscious of that, what the bride was saying to herself in that period. She was not agreeing, with what the bridegroom was saying. At that point, she wasn't agreeing with it. And I think when we speak of knowing who and what we are, that's big for all of us.
It is. It's huge. I talk about, like, when I'm doing my prophetic training classes, I talk about we have to be careful what we speak, and people misuse and abuse prophecy all the time. And so when we're prophesying, we have to be even more careful, but we are designed to listen to what's spoken or what we rehearse in our head. And I share a different study. So I was like, ooh, I'm going to use Diane's book, and I'm going to talk about this the next time I teach my class, because I love this. And it's a newer study, and it's about plants, and it lines up with the same things about Dr. Masaru about the messages in water, and how we as humans are made up of a huge percentage of water. And so how it changes the molecular constructs of us. And with this plant, it was just, I was like, I get it. I understood. And so I wanted people to hear you talk about that. Okay. I have so many people, Diane, in my life right now that have suffered loss in this last year. They're in the grieving process. And I have to say, when I got to this particular chapter where you were kind of talking about that, and you were talking about a sitting Shiva, is that how you say it? Or how do you say it?
Yeah.
Shiva. Yeah, I want you to talk about that, because I thought this is so important for people to understand. And I think it helped me actually speak to other people too about, you don't always have to say the right thing. I always say ministry of presence. But you put it in a way when you talked about this, and then you said, working on our grief is an opportunity to be vulnerable, honest, and proactive about our healing. And so they kind of go hand in hand, because I mean, I know when I lost my dad, and people were trying to say all the right things,
right?
They were not helpful. And so
things weren't helpful.
Yeah. Well, just kind of some of the things that they said is, oh, you're going to get through this, or, you even quoted this one, I think, in the book too, like, God's not going to give you more than you can handle. Okay. Well, I lost my dad. Thanks. That's not really helpful right now. I mean, I know those things to be true, but right now I need to grieve. And when I was reading this part, so I want you to talk about what a sitting Shiva is, because
if you're Jewish out there and I have it wrong, just write in.
Yes. I'm famous for mispronouncing things all the time.
That's all right.
That's why I'm like, but when we were young, and I miscarried in a second trimester, but what was most important, that I go back to remember, wasn't the pain of the loss of that, but was that the associate pastor's wife came and just sat with me. She didn't say anything. She didn't do anything. She didn't try to make me eat. She just said, I'm here if you need me. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I mean, we were friends, but it was like, well, I just want to be bawling my eyes out right now. Like, I don't want to do that in front of you. I don't want to ugly cry. But she was just there, and she was just like making sure I had water and tissues. And she didn't really say anything. And so I was like, I don't even know that she knew what she was doing, but she was sort of doing this. So talk about it.
Right. Yeah. So you started out by saying, okay, we all have losses. And I wanted this chapter actually be entitled The Loss of Plan A, but book company thought it was something else. But it's just like what I thought I had in mind for this season didn't turn out. Period. Right? It's going on a different path. So a lot of people don't understand that that's a grief of sorts. I am still going to have to grieve that loss. And despite whether it feels like it's a big thing to them or not, I still have to go through that same stupid process. So if you're out there and you've just, COVID was a big loss for everyone.
Yeah.
But you've lost a job, it doesn't seem like, like Debbie, what you're talking about, losing a child or losing a human, those seem huge, but these other things, they add up. I've moved to a new city. You named a bunch of stressors at the beginning of this when I was talking. I was like, my little therapist hat's like, it's a lot of stressors, And when you have them all, in the same season, they just add up. And unfortunately, we have to grieve them all. And often when you tell people that, you're like, okay, see that house on fire over there? I'm just going to ask you to go in the front door. People are like, yeah, no, can I go over that, under that, or around that? I'm like, I'm sorry. The grieving process means you're probably going to have to go through a little bit of that pain. And you're probably going to have to let yourself feel it. And I work with that at the end of the chapter on, how people can do that and do that in a more healthy manner. But when I was digging up the information, this sitting Shiva came up and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the deal. When they have a loss, they cover all their mirrors. I love that.
Yeah.
Basically, they're saying, this is not an external thing. This is an internal thing. We need you to take some time and go internal. And that's one step that a lot of people just don't do because it's painful. What? Like you said, I don't want to sit here and ugly cry. But the reality is it may be part of the process. It's not something I'm going to do 24/7, but it may be part of the process, of getting through this loss. And then they ask people to, when they come over, to just sit with them like your friend did. They're not even supposed to speak unless they speak well of the person that was, they bless. We bless Harry so much. He brought such, life into all of us. And that's it. They just sit and be with them in their time of grief.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we end up taking care of the person who's trying to take care of us. Because, they're having such a hard time with whatever's going on. So the support, it just reminded me so much of the Father. Sometimes he's not talking to us. He's not, giving us step 1, 2, 3, but he is there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And there are times when I love my grandchild, they have their imaginary friends, and would just tell me that Jesus is sitting on that chair over there. And I was like, that's amazing. Let's think that. Let's just think that, because he really doesn't need to speak to me right now, but I do need the comfort of knowing, that he's here. So that was part of that process. And I do talk with, in the book about people, they do have some very plutonic sayings for us that sometimes are just not helpful. I've done it to people. And when and when I read this, I was like, perfect. It answers what you should or shouldn't say. And it helps the person feel the comfort, to heal their own grief.
Yeah.
And then I talk for a little further about, healing that grief through the process.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I really appreciate too, about at the end of each one of the 12 steps, at the end of the chapter, you have, what do you call them? Steps.
Exercises.
That's the word. I was looking for that. Because like each one of the 12 steps has exercises for you to go. And everybody that knows me knows that I'm an activation or exercise queen. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, we want to put it into practice so that you actually activate what you just heard, what you just learned. And so that was what I appreciated because and they're not, I mean, it really is introspective, some of the questions that you had and things that you put there. And I did kind of feel like I was in a counseling session with you. Like, I mean, as I'm like, like when I got to that part on the grief and the sitting Shiva, I was like, I know we're talking about the loss of a person too, but you said it was more than just that. It's like the loss of a job. Like, my son and husband lost a job. They were going through a grieving process. My husband got saved. Now he has survivor's remorse because he had an extension on his job. And my son, I'm like, I'm not letting him grieve. I'm trying to get in there and be the mom and fix things. And
Fix
when I
things, I
and
know.
yeah, and when I read that, I was like, I just need to sit there with him. I just need to bless him and the situation and allow him to process. And
Be
that was
quite
so
open.
helpful to me.
Oh, that's so good. And I hope the listeners heard that because, if you're a mom of young adults, we want to fix it.
Yes.
It's their job. It's their job as a mother.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes the actually, when we talked about that mental health crisis that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
one critical factor is that lack of healthy coping mechanisms. And I'm sorry if you're a young adult out there,
Yeah.
but the reason for that is because I am trying to fix your problem
Mm,
rather than allowing you to deal with life's stresses and messes.
that's good.
And if they're in front of you, helping you find some coping skills for them that I had to figure out, my parents had to figure out, my grandparents had to figure out, and your kids will have to figure out, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what's going on with that stress is rather than leading you to those healthy coping skills, I'm trying to fix it for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that's one of the things behind the book that, I'm like, let me help you get to helping yourself, in this process.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good, Diane. It's so good. There are so many directions that we could have talked about today. I have a gazillion other questions for you that we could go.
Okay.
But I think, just on this, because it is so important that at some point all of us are going to go through this grieving process. We're going to go through this or have somebody that is,
Right.
and that was really helpful. It was insightful to me, really, too. Last question for you on the top of the book, because you talk a lot about joy. Step 8 is accessing joy, which I am like camping on the joy of the Lord is your strength out of Nehemiah. So when I got to step 8 and you even talk about Nehemiah, I was like, yes. Yes. And you talk, even later on, you talk about, prayer is the cause, but peace is the effect, and that joy is powerful and it's an essential emotion. And so why and how can we access joy, and why is it important for us to learn to access it?
I have no evidence for this, but
Okay.
we all know that there are principalities out there that are not good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord told us to walk in love and joy and peace, and I believe they carry that opposite power
Mm.
for being transformational
Yeah.
for us as human beings,
Mm.
right? Why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't there be positive to all the negative things that are out there? So when we're not walking in that, we've talked about this, in the other examples, when we're not walking in those, capacities in our life, the other things are all consuming.
Mm.
It's like we never have at least the equal wall or even the greater wall
Mm-hmm.
where I can walk in the midst. I'm not saying that you're not going to have these things in your life. I'm not going to say that you're not going to have fear and trauma and, God forbid, rejection and shame. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, let's take a look at how let's say if they're going to run my life. if they're going to be the end all to how I walk.
Mm.
Because I know, and I remember when I was younger, if you're younger and you're listening to this, and I used to see, Christians who seemed happy in the midst of their wife's cancer or in the midst of something that was happening, with their child. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? Can't you see the seriousness of what you're going through? Because their mindset had changed to that of the Lord's and how he looked. Their identity had moved into how the Lord was looking at the situation. And that is 100% where we're trying to get to is my identity needs to be looking at this from a different entire concept or direction, because like you said, my joy is in the Lord, not in what's happening in this world. He's been very clear that this world's going to be full of mess.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's so true. That is
right.
so true.
And so when I get to that point where I know that I'm his and I know why I'm here, my joy is in that relationship. And I talk about that relationship status and how that looks with Nehemiah. I read, recently, a very small book when I was talking about, not having joy is a lack of being relational. And I was like, oh my gosh. And COVID, we all got sent to our own room. This is crazy,
Yeah.
And I talk about that and what that does to our brain, and it's relational with your friends and your family and your coworkers, but it's also relational, like you said, with the Lord.
Yeah. That's so good. Okay, Diane, how can people connect with you? How can they purchase a copy of 12 Habits for a Sound Mind and a Joyful Life?
So when we set up our nonprofit, you'll love this. We sat down with our young adults, our millennials, and we said, what do you want to do? What do you want to do as a legacy in our family? And the interesting thing, I would thought they would want to do a business thing with their dad. I'm going to be perfectly honest. You're listening to me, kids. I did. But the reality is they said, because of what you and dad have gone through, because, mom, you have spent your life, trying to help people with that. We want to do something in the category of family. How do we help families? And so we set up a nonprofit called thefamilycollective.co. And the reason it's CO is because I have millennials and they thought that was cool. So please don't look under com. But under that, you can find links to a lot of our information. We have small teachings on a lot of things, and we have big ones. We have entire marriage courses. We have online marriage groups. If you're a pastor or a leader out there, we have a premarital course. I love that for people because I found that premarital was really hard. What I more importantly found is 40% of marriages, covenants can be saved if they have decent premarital.
Oh, that's great.
40%. I mean, and we're so struggling with that number and what that does to individuals when families break up. And so I've provided what I would say, all of the materials are what's the word? Connection of psychology and faith. And so on all of the materials that are out there, it's not just another material. I'm actually taking the best of what the world has and the best of what the Lord has and putting them together for materials. So it's that plus many resources out. So please go to that website. You can get the book. You can look at those programs, those, what do you call when you take an online class, basically the online classes, and some of them my young adults help teach, and some of them are, for my husband and I. Like I said, he's in finance, so he has some great, information out there on that. All of it's to help the family be healthier.
I love that because we need that because God's all about the family and the foundation. Well, as we wrap up today's podcast, Diane, I always like to is there anything else that's on your heart or a prayer or anything that you want to declare over us as we end today's episode?
Yes, please let me pray over you.
Okay, thank you.
Heavenly Father, I thank you for this courageous woman and her podcast. Lord, I ask that you bless the listeners, not the listeners who need to be listening, and the listeners that are listening. Give favor and just nuggets of wisdom to those that have heard the message and that heard the resources and her heart for them, and give just a nudge to those that are supposed to be here, those that are missing what you've called them to hear and do. Most importantly, she and I agree that if you're listening to this podcast right now, that the Lord's joy and the Lord's peace rests on you all the days of your life, and that his restoration is for you and your family. And we will constantly help you find the place where you can access that. We bless you. We ask God's guidance in everything you do. Amen.
Amen. Diane, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. It
You're
was
so
such
welcome.
an honor. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And 12 Habits for a Sound Mind and a Joyful Life.
Yes.
Black Friday is coming up. You guys can go get yourself a copy of it. So thank you for listening to Dare to Hear the podcast, where we encourage you to dare to hear the voice of God. I'm Debbie Kitterman. If you've been blessed at all in any way, we want to ask you to do a couple of things. Share this podcast episode out so we can get out this message, because more people need to hear this, and you need to get a copy of this book because it is very, very helpful and very informative in a way that I think we can all apply to our life. So 12 Habits for a Sound Mind and a Joyful Life by Diane Arnold. And if you're at a place where you can like us, leave us a review or subscribe, we'd love you to do all of those things. And until next week, God bless and goodbye.
I'm not in the thunder, I'm not in the rain, I'm not in the winds of the hurricane. Look to me, I'm drawing you near. I have called you, dare to hear. 'Cause there's peace in my presence, so do not fear. Oh, do not fear. I have called you. In the fall